Hey watch friends, 2020 was a huge year for the channel and I want to take this time to thank you all and wish you a happy start to 2021. So with that, I was trying to decide what watch would be appropriate for my first video of the year, and I thought what one could be better than the Zelos Skyraider, which is one that I anticipated all throughout 2020. This one is actually the Zelos Skyraider 2, and as you can see, we have it here in two colorways that we'll look at in a lot of detail throughout. But one thing that I will say right off the bat, thank you all for the feedback. I've had a few requests to try to slow down, so I will try to contain my excitement and my Christmas cookie sugar high here while we go through this video. So with that, sit back, enjoy, and let's take a look at these Zelos Skyraiders. Alright, so initially kicking off with the overall dimensions, this is coming in with a 42mm case, and I did measure in right here at the inside crease of the lugs. You can see it kind of cuts in, and I did get exactly 42mm. Switching over to the lugs, you are looking at 22mm lugs, and this does taper down on the stock bracelet to 20mm. For lug-to-lug length, this one is a little bit unique here. So there's two things I want to highlight. The overall lug-to-lug is 48.5mm, very reasonable for a 42mm watch. However, this one, do note that it has relatively large male end links on the stock bracelet. So if you are planning on running this on the stock bracelet, do note that this comes in at 54 3/4 on my calipers. So real quick, normally I wait a little bit. Let's go ahead and show this. This is on my 6.5-inch wrist, and this gives you an idea as to what to expect. So with my particular wrist, you can see that I have a fairly flat 6.5-inch wrist, and thankfully I am able to, I think, pull these off and pull them off fairly well. Certainly it is a lot of dial presence. Some of you, this might be larger than you would otherwise want, but if you have a larger wrist, I think you'll be solid. If you have a smaller wrist, honestly, I'd say 6.5 inches is about the smallest that I would recommend this for in terms of wrist size. So looking at the total thickness, one of the things that's nice with this particular one is they did slim this down. It's coming in at a relatively svelte 10.7mm for overall thickness. Certainly could be thinner for being a manual wind watch, as we'll talk about here in a moment, but I think it's pretty nice and slim, and I think it goes well with the case overall. For the crystal here, you can see that this one is completely flat, so this is a sapphire crystal, and it does have an inner AR coating. And then for the movement, this is one of the things that is coolest about this watch as a whole. As you can see, for me personally, I think it's a gorgeous looking watch. Anytime you're dealing with a lot of hype for a watch, you wonder if it's going to let you down. And we'll look at in this video whether it does or does not. Overall, I can tell you, I'm impressed with it. It's not perfect, but overall, I do like it quite a lot. So the movement in this particular one is in ETA 6498, and this is the -1 version of that. If you're not familiar with this movement, it's one that actually, it and its counterpart, the 6497, date back to the 1950s. These actually originally, so these were a Unitas or ETA movement, and they originally were actually for pocket watches, which for me is one of those kind of cool things, especially in a modern watch, and certainly this Flieger design does have a modern take and modern elements, but having kind of a nostalgic watch movement in there, I think is really cool. In terms of the -1 variant here, there's a -1 and a -2 of the 6498. The -1 is the lower beat. They're both low beat movements, but this one is ticking away at 18,800 beats per hour, which with just having that small subbed out, I don't think you can really notice the difference in the overall smoothness, so I'm perfectly satisfied with that. And as far as power reserve, the Zelos site lists this as 44 hours for the power reserve. However, I clocked this and I tried this on both of these variants here, and we'll look at both of them closer. Actually, I'll swap out for the rest of this so we can take a look and give each one a little more camera time. But in terms of power reserve, I actually got well over 48 hours for this. So I found that I got over 53 hours on each of these for total power reserve. But I would say comfortably 48 hours. It did start to gradually lose time until it eventually stopped at just shy of 54 hours. So I would say 2 days plus for power reserve. In terms of water resistance, both of these are coming in at 50 meters of water resistance, so certainly not being dive watches, and as we'll talk about with the crown, this is not a screw-down crown. You get adequate for things like getting caught in the rain, those kind of things, but I would not take this swimming or anything along those lines. In terms of weight for this is one of the more interesting pieces as we go through here. The weight of these, you might wonder what a difference is made by the skeletonization. And here we have the skeleton coming in at 107.6 grams, and that is on this bracelet, and this is a titanium bracelet and size to my 6.5-inch wrist. And then the meteorite here is coming in at 120.4 grams. So total for the difference, you're looking at just shy of 13 grams difference. To me, that was pretty impressive. I mean, it's not a huge difference as you feel them in the hand, but it definitely is, I think, a fairly significant difference, and it shows you just how much skeletonization went into these watches, and certainly we'll look at the Caseback in more details throughout. So setting that one aside, now, looking at some of the accessories that this came with, in case you missed my recent unboxing video, this does come with the typical Zelos packaging. You get your watch roll, your acacia wood box with magnetic closure. But one of the items that I showed there is it does come with this nice little pod. And this is a zip-up style, and it is a hard case, has cushion lining on the inside. I really like this quite a lot. I actually provided Elshawn with feedback that I would love to see these available as an option or included with watches moving forward. Certainly you can buy them elsewhere, but I like this color here. It reminds me of a lot of my gray canvas straps, and then the Zelos branding, of course, is cool as well. For the warranty, you still do just get 1 year warranty with this, which is typical of the Zelos. I will say, as I've said in many other videos before, Zelos does have fantastic customer support, so I wouldn't let that deter you, though it would be nice to officially see it longer. So now let's go ahead and start getting into some of the specifics as far as my experience and some of the things that you'll want to note on these two watches. So first, looking at the dial, one thing that you'll notice here is, of course, there is a huge variety between these two specific versions, the Skeleton versus the Blue Meteorite. There are also a number of other colorways that are available. You have a teal guilloche, you have a frost version, you have a forged carbon. So you have a wide array of different dials that you can choose from. And they not only vary in color, but they actually vary in the textures and things as well. With the solid version, so the traditional dials, you'll see that they have the same pattern throughout in terms of the numerals and the markers, but the skeleton, you can see, does vary significantly from that. In terms of the overall style, these are, of course, a pilot style watch. These are what you would consider to be, I would say, a modern take on a Flieger design. With the Meteorite, you've probably seen, if you're familiar with the Zelos lineup, some other Blue Meteorite versions. There has been the Horizons GMT, there has been Swordfish, there's been a number of other ones in the past. However, this one is unique, and we'll get some outside footage here in a little bit, but look at just how much that shifts. One of the things that I really like with this is it almost has like a tinfoil kind of effect or a metallic effect, and it gives it just like a gem luminescence, especially in indirect light. And of course, as with most Meteorite, all those striations do really play with the light. So I think that's absolutely gorgeous and very cool. And of course, the skeleton, I mean, what more do you need to say? It's an absolutely incredible skeleton. And as we look through, you can see kind of the machine brushing throughout there. Some interesting choices with some of the pieces for this. This does definitely vary, and we'll look at the V1 kind of comparison in notes there for this. But it has a lot of really cool things that are going on with this. In terms of the skeleton here, you can see this one does not have any indicators for it. So it just has your 12, 3, 6, and 9 o'clock, and it keeps that exactly the same between these two. However, it loses all of your numerals going around to keep that more open skeletal feel. Additionally, looking at the logos, you can see on the standard dials, they just have the traditional Zelos logo just shy of the 12 o'clock. And on the skeleton version, you can see one at the 3 o'clock and another one at the 9 o'clock. I'm not honestly sure why there are the two on the front of the watch. However, the V1 actually had a very similar setup and configuration. Not something that distracts or takes away in any way, just something to note. In terms of the overall handset, these ones, as you can see, they have a very unique handset design. I really like that about them. They are not generic handset by any means. I think that they add to great legibility, especially on the standard dial versions. In terms of coloration, you can see they are the same handset. I believe that they're both, I've tried looking at these a lot, I believe that they are both different colors for this. This, to me, presents with more of a gunmetal hue, whereas this just looks like a polished silver for it. If that is not the case, then it does pick up that darker coloration from the case. I've played around with these in a lot of different lights, and to me, it always seems to have it present. So I believe that they are different there for the overall coloration. In terms of the numerals here, as you can see, these are applied indices on the standard dial. They do have a nice polishing on the outside, and then these are loomed, and we'll look at the detailed loom as well. While we're on the topic of loom, we'll look at that further, but this one does have dual loom, so it has C3 and BGW9, and we'll see that pattern, whereas this one just has C3 throughout, and that's on the handset, as well as your 4 markers. And the second hand there as well. So transitioning then to the overall case, let's set one of these down because the case is going to be the same. So you're going to see that this has nice, this is full titanium construction. So this is grade 2 titanium that's on the case, as well as the bracelet, with the exception of the clasp, which is stainless steel. And we've seen that clasp on some other Zelos at this point. The finish overall is brushed on all surfaces, and you can see the linear pattern does vary throughout as far as the direction. And then on the inside of the lugs, that's the only bit that I believe where it is mirror polished. You can see just inside of there, you get that little bit of polish for that nice little pop in contrast, and it adds to the angular design of this case. As you can see, it's not just a standard or straight line, or round rather for that. It does come in and has a nice crease line and then comes down to angular for the lug cut. Similarly, you have a little bit of lip there before that tapers down for your lugs. So on the lug front, you can see that this does have nice turn down lugs, that as we saw on the wrist, and let's go ahead and do a quick wrist shot with the Skelly as well. This one, you can see it does taper down, so even though it has those male end links that brings it out towards the edge of my wrist, it does fit and contour nicely on the wrist overall. So it wears very comfortably, and especially for being a 42 millimeter on my smaller wrist, lots of dial presence. If you have a larger wrist, I think that this will make you more than happy, and we'll look at a comparison to see how this stacks up against other 42s as well. So then transitioning over to the crown. This is something that deserves a lot of focus, and this is particularly because this is a manual wind watch. So you need the crown to be comfortable because you're going to be winding it daily or every other day, however you choose to do it. This crown, you can see, has a nice design to it. I think it's aesthetically pleasing. It is shortened up from the V1, and we'll talk about that more. It is a signed crown. This is not a loomed crown, though. And in terms of overall feel, I want to switch over. You've got to see this. So one of the things that's really cool with the skeleton version, and you get this with both, I'm going to stop talking for a second and listen to this. I absolutely love that effect, that clicking that you get as you go through. I hope that this adequately picked it up on camera here. It gives a nice, very pronounced click as you go through. It's a really cool, really satisfying. And then in case you didn't notice, check out that mainspring as this goes. You can see that actually wind through. So this kind of, even though it doesn't have a power reserve indicator, on the skeleton version, you can actually track and monitor your power reserve because you'll watch that mainspring go clear out. Really neat. And then while we're in there, let's go and look at that balance wheel go. Too cool watching that beat away. Love that. Sorry, getting myself distracted here. All right, so now that we've looked through the crown, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a screw-down crown, which you wouldn't want for a manual wind, in my opinion, so it makes it nice, easy to go through the wind. Has excellent grip for that. This is only coming in at 6.9 millimeters, smaller than I would otherwise say that I probably would want for ideal, and that is at the thickest point, because you can see this has a taper to it. However, it feels very large in the hand. I was surprised when I took those measurements. I thought it was going to be larger than that. So all that is to say, it's very easy to get a hold of and winds very nicely. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the bracelet, and this is the same on both. You can see it has a very unique design to it. It's mostly brushed, and then on the inner cuts here, you do have, I guess it's like a bead blasted kind of finish. It's more of a sandy texture to that. I think overall, it fits the design of the watch well. It's comfortable on wrist. One thing that I have found is the clasp, and this is true of every one of the Zelos that I've had with this clasp. It does pinch my arm hair a little bit sometimes when I initially put it on. What I find that I do is I try to put it down here, away from the hair, get it popped, and then slide it up, and I don't have that issue. So I think it's actually just pinching here in the bridge. This clasp, while we're on that topic, there is a newer version of this clasp that is available on upcoming model. I forget which one it is, to be honest, but it is full brush. There's been some user feedback as far as bead blast versus brush, and then same thing, people complain about this being sharp. I found it to be a non-issue. Is it sharp? Yes. Does it impact anything? No, not in my experience, but it is something to note. This does have the older, or the original style of this. One of the claims to fame with this clasp is this is kind of like a Christopher Ward-esque, where you do have lever and you can do toolless micro adjustment for that. Huge feature, really like it. That's a big thing for me. And as with other Zelos models, this does come with screw-in bracelet links. So easy adjustment there. Do make sure that you tighten those up whenever you get these new watches, and then check them periodically, or put a tiny dot of Loctite on them if you want to make sure that they don't drift on you or unscrew at all. I talked about in the unboxing video, and one of the reasons you can see I had this on the cushions here is this actually does not have a lot of articulation, so that is as flat as it goes. I have not found, even on my smaller wrist, that it had any kind of negative impact. I was curious if it was going to sit well or not, and I find that it definitely does. So that's just a little thing to note there. All right, so now let's go ahead and transition over, and we can take a look at the Casebacks. Transitioning over to the Caseback, you can see that this is a watch that definitely does not have a bad side. So while the movements are the same in both of these, you can see the finish of the movements is dramatically different, and both are absolutely gorgeous. So let's go ahead and take a closer look. This first is going to be any of your standard dials, so this is the Meteorite version. And you can see just an absolute stunning PVD on the main plates there. You have blued hardware throughout. Very simple as far as the finishing. This has the serial number just on the perimeter. And then this text here on the crystal, we'll see in the loom shot, is actually a loom text. So while it's somewhat of a novelty feature being on the back of the watch, it's something I think is really cool and I've never seen done before. But the main thing is just looking at that movement beating away. Look at the balance wheel going. It's just absolutely gorgeous. Transitioning now over to the Skeleton version, you can see just completely different. There's the stainless screws, or the mirror polished stainless screws, as opposed to the blued hardware. Otherwise, the aesthetics of it is overall the same, with the exception of the skeletonization, and that actually changes. Even you can see on the mainspring wheel there, you can actually see the spring through that. I mean, just incredible attention to detail and touches. But speaking of attention to detail, unfortunately, this one does have one downside, which is I do, much like Jody experienced with his review, this one does appear to have a little bit of debris on the inside. You can see a dot there. I think that might be a little bit of lubricant or something coming free from that. And then just past the 2, you can see a little sliver of what looks like it might be potentially a sheared piece from a gear or something in there. So it's something I'll keep an eye on. I'm going to contact Elshawn and see what he says about it. But overall, I mean, just check these things out. They are absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous movements to watch beat away. These are watches, I mean, you can truly just get sucked in and end up staring at even the back of the watch for hours here, just watching those go. It's absolutely gorgeous execution. All right, so there you have it. That's the Caseback, as you can see, has really cool, impressive appearance there. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the comparisons for these with some other models. So first off, with the V1, the Blue Meteorite is an all-new colorway for the V2. The Skeleton, there was a Skeleton previously, but there's a lot of changes to the skeletonization. You have like the various, for the gears here, where that was all opened up. I really like that impact a lot, and some other changes throughout as well. For the overall model as a whole, one of the things is this went to a flat crystal instead of a slight dome. This went for a slightly smaller crown, which I like that it is shortened, still easy to grip, but visually I think fits a little more cohesively on the watch. The bracelet is all new. There was not previously a bracelet that was available. The lug to lug was shortened up, which was very welcome for me with having smaller wrists. The thickness was shrunken down, so this is skinnier than the V1. And then the loom was changed around from C3 to BGW9. I'm sorry, vice versa on that BGW9 over to C3. And then the loom text on the Caseback that we will check out here momentarily as well. So now let's bring in another stainless steel watch, or titanium watch rather, so you can see, kind of get an idea of what this looks like. This is the titanium swordfish, and we've looked at this one on the channel before. You can see the overall finishing is pretty similar for this. This one has more polish to it. Not hugely more, but it does have some more accents throughout, but overall fairly similar aesthetic for that. So now that we've looked at those items, let's go ahead and transition over and take a look at some outdoor footage, as well as we will take a look at the loom. So I braved the elements to check these outdoor, pardon the water drops here. You can see these really come to life. You get more of that gunmetal hue out here from the skeleton. You can see as it shifts across, it really picks up and has that nice luster to it and sets it off. Same thing with the blue meteorite. You can see that one, that effect that I've been talking about, where it has almost like that tinfoil or metallic kind of appearance to that. Really cool watching that color shift. This gives you an idea too as to what they look like on the wrist. As you can see, they fit, I think, rather nicely. So transitioning over now, let's go ahead and check out the loom. As we talked about, you can see on the left here, we have the meteorite that does have the dual loom. So you see a lot of C3, and that's going to be on your handset as well as all of your markers. And then down on the subdial perimeter, as well as the outside minute track, you do have BGW9. The skeleton is going to be much more simplistic. Again, you just have C3 on that one, and you can see it has the exact same set, losing the numerals as well as the minute and second track. Now, as you can see a pop up on the screen here, this actually came with the loomed caseback. So this certainly, again, this is just a novelty kind of feature there, but something that I think is really cool for them to do and kind of step outside the box. All right, so in closing here, now that we've kind of taken a look at all of the different elements of this, hopefully you have a better idea as to what to expect from the Skyraider. These are unfortunately sold out. However, they do frequently pop up in the secondary market. The total price for these, the launch pricing ranged from $899 for the standard colorways, $999 for the Meteorite and the Forged Carbon, and then $1499 for the Skeleton. The retail price on those bumps up from a range of $1099, so roughly $1,100, up to about $1,900 for the skeleton version. So if you can find these, they should be popping up at dealers, as well as keep an eye on the secondary market if you are looking for one. So in terms of overall thoughts, what are some items that I would observe for this as far as both the good and the bad? I found that this sits extremely well on the wrist. They're very comfortable, as we saw throughout. I think they fit well even on my smaller wrist. They feel relatively light, especially for the size that they are. You get a lot of wrist presence for the total weight that you have here. So not as light as something like the Ricel Resolutes or RZE Resolutes that we recently looked at, but it definitely is a lot lighter than you'd expect and a lot lighter than it would be for a similar size watch in stainless steel or of course bronze as well. Overall aesthetics, I think, on both of these are just absolutely stunning. I think they did killer design for these total. I think there was a lot of thought that went into the execution, and I'm just very pleased with both of these watches as a whole. The movement, that's one of the shining features for me. I think it's a lot of fun. It's very cool as far as just knowing the history and the legacy behind this, listening to those clicks as you wind through, just something that I really like. Same thing of this. In terms of total price, these absolutely are not cheap, and I'm sure some people are scoffing at $1,000 to $1,500 for a micro brand watch. However, I think if you compare the feature set, especially looking at what else is available out there for skeleton watches, I think that this very much holds its own and packs a lot of value for what you're actually getting. So not cheap in price, but I do think it is solid in value. Legibility. Legibility, I would say, is going to be a strength and a weakness. And with that, the legibility I think is just fantastic across all lighting conditions. You can see as this shifts to black, very legible. As you go to low light condition and from the loom, you saw excellent legibility. The skeleton is the exact opposite. Certainly you expect to have some compromise with skeletons. There's always going to be a reduction in legibility. However, I think there are some things that could have been done to make this more legible than it is. Can you read it? Can you see it on camera? Certainly. Going throughout the day on wrist, as you get some of that glare, it's really easy to lose that handset in the back movement. So it's just something to be aware of. I don't think that it takes away from the artistic style of this, but do know from a functional standpoint, it is going to be a little bit limiting for you. So what are some ideas that I have as far as things that I would have liked to have seen? So whether it be cons or little things that could have been done differently. So the first is the movement. I've raved a lot about how much I like the 6498 in this, and I think it is excellent. However, do be aware this movement does not have hacking. So that's something that it's a limitation of the movement. I wouldn't have wanted to change it out. If we had hacking, that would be great. Unfortunately, this one can't have it. Also, I will tell you that I have noticed that these are noisy. That might sound trivial, and it's much less on the Meteorite. On the Skelly, I do definitely notice you can hear it tapping away. Hopefully that picked up on camera for you. But in person, it is definitely much more noticeable listening to this escapement hit in there. So that being said, it's not a huge deal, but it is something to be aware of. If you're sitting in a quiet boardroom or something like that, you can definitely pick up on it. You don't have to put it up to your ear to notice. In terms of legibility, something that I think could have been easy changes on this the skeleton version, and the blue meteorite I think is virtually perfect. The skeleton version I would have liked to have seen on the rehot here. I would have liked to have seen the individual ticks for the minute, so kind of bump that up from the outer ring and kick that up to the rehot. I think that would have helped for easier legibility and better tracking. Similarly, going down to the subdial, you can see this one does not have, like this does, where it has the numerals. I would have liked to have seen numerals on there. I think that could have been squeezed in or just pulled in just a hair more of the metal. I don't think you would have lost anything for the skeletonization, and it would have definitely helped for legibility. And then finally, the handset. I would have liked to have seen possibly like a blue or even a gold for the handset, just to add a little more contrast. Certainly that's going to be subjective. It won't be to everyone's taste, but I think either one would have really helped for the legibility on this, especially as it picked up the light, just to give a little more contrast since it is kind of that gunmetal finish throughout there. So those really, not a whole lot of cons for this. We already saw on the Caseback, unfortunately, my skeleton does have just a tiny bit of debris that's in there. I don't mean to excuse that because certainly it's not something that I am particularly thrilled about, but ultimately I don't think it's a huge deal for this, and it's not something that I've noticed in day-to-day use, and it's something that will be straightened out and squared away there. So overall, my full thought on this is if you can get your hands on one, I absolutely think any of the specific colorways. I think these watches are just fantastic for the total money. I think you get a lot of watch for it. I think they have great wrist presence, whether you have a small wrist, a large wrist. Again, I wouldn't recommend below 6.5 inch wrists with a fairly flat wrist, but anything above that, I think you're going to be very pleased with the overall for presence. And as far as bang for the buck, I just think these are great watches. So I hope that this review has been helpful for you in making your decision, and if you get the chance, I definitely encourage you to pick one up. Thanks for watching.